My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. This episode of the Sales Lab is brought to you by the 2020 International Collegiate Sales Competition, a sales recruiting event happening November 11th through 14th in sunny Orlando, Florida. Look, we all know that recruiting top talent is a persistent challenge for sales organizations. The mission of the ICSC is to enhance the selling profession by encouraging the development of the critical sales skills needed by today's collegiate sales graduates in a fun and competitive environment, and to provide a venue where companies can meet the nation's top collegiate sales talent in one place. This year, the ICSC will be attended by over 500 sales-focused college students from over 90 universities who come to compete in either a sales role-play competition, a sales management case competition, or both. Will your organization be there to hire the best of the best from around the country? Visit www.icsc-fsu.org. That's ICSC as in International Collegiate Sales Competition, FSU, as in Florida State University.org, for more information on how you can get involved. Don't let these great recruits go to your competitors. In today's episode, we're going to talk to Val McCausland. She's a VP over at Gartner. Good friend. Gartner hires an awful lot of our sales graduates, and I'm happy to have her. And actually, the beginning of this discussion, you'll hear we're talking a little bit about the podcast. So I think it's kind of cool that this is going to be the first episode, because actually in the conversation with Val, you kind of get some of the background behind the intent of this podcast. Beyond that, we'll talk a little bit about crushing it, whether telling a young salesperson to crush it is good advice. We'll talk a little bit about Alec Baldwin, who I'm sure is listening. Hi, Alec. Early career development, sales basics, dealing with failure, and why sales might be the best place to start, even if you don't envision spending your entire career in sales. Thanks for listening. This is going to be part one of a two-part series, so make sure you come back for the next episode to finish the discussion with Val.
I believe that I am going to launch a podcast with this material.
Okay.
That's the idea. Of course, if all the content totally sucks and isn't interesting, then I, reserve the right to say, I was never going to do a podcast. No, I don't know.
Makes sense.
I don't know why you thought that. But yeah, the idea is to talk about the profession. We talk about sales, leadership, developing salespeople, recruiting salespeople, all of these things. I wanted it to be about the sales profession. I wanted it to be general enough that some dude that works in sales, searching through podcasts can see this. Mm-hmm. Probably going to call it the Sales Lab, because it's kind of a play on words. Really just to be more about the profession, more about coming up with interesting ideas, solving some problems, uncovering challenges that we need to solve, maybe looking at things in a different way. There's other podcasts out there, but and I've actually found quite a few that are pretty good. Some that are really, really not good. And some that are very motivational. Say, get out there and do it. Crush it. They say crush it. I'm going to try to never say crush it on this podcast.
That.
Because I don't know what it means. So we look at it seriously, deliberately, maybe a little analytically, thought-provoking, not just go out there and work harder, it never occurred to me to go out there and work harder.
Every student I cross at Gartner specifically wants to know how. So the word crush it is great until they actually need to know how to crush it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And
I'm going to say crush it one more time.
Yeah, just squeeze it in there as much as you can. People that listen to various podcasts will probably know who I'm picking on when they.
That's okay. Maybe they'll stop saying crush it.
I'm comfortable with it, but it can't just be work harder. If you're not working hard, that's a part of the formula. You have to do that, but once you're doing that, there's no more days, there's no more hours. We gotta be clever.
Great.
So, Val McCausland.
Yes, sir.
Am I saying that right?
There you are.
Okay.
That was perfect on the first time.
There you go. You're with Gartner. What's your formal title?
MVP, which I would love to be most valuable player, but that's not the case. I'm managing vice president of sales, and I lead a group of about 275 individuals, individual contributors, first line area managers, and then regional vice presidents.
And this is in the outside sales world.
This is inside sales.
This is inside sales. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Particularly for our emerging and mid-sized tech vendors.
Okay. Cool. And how did you get into this position? You started in sales. What was your pathway?
I have a very interesting path. So I was a Gartner client before I came in, computer programmer, had never carried a quota in my entire life. Changed my major 6 times, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and landed at this penny stock company doing marketing and development for them. And absolutely loved going out in front of the client and helping them do the tech demo behind the scenes and answering questions and really figuring out, why are we even here? And saw an opportunity to move to a different organization based on some of the things that were happening in the company that I was working at, which it's now divested. And I had my, at that time, account executive from Gartner say, come over and see what we're all about. Didn't know he was getting a referral bonus when it happened. Mm-hmm. And I came in and I interviewed in the initial Fort Myers building. And to be honest with you, I was not sure that's what I wanted to do. I had an office, I had a budget, I had a team. Working at a startup, you walk right into the president's office. You're working with the board. It just was different. And I remember being so scared. And to your point, I had no methodology. Mm-hmm. I had never carried a quota. I wasn't professionally trained, which is why I have so much admiration for professional selling programs and certificates that we're actually helping people figure this out now. And I went for it. Big leap of faith. And sold there for about a year and then moved into leadership after that.
Wow. Was that down in Fort Myers or?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So what specifically about it was scary? Just that it was different, or the quota aspect of it, or?
The quota I don't love, I'll be very honest with you. I'm super competitive and I don't like to let anyone down. And so my whole philosophy has always been, we'll just overachieve. That way you don't ever have to worry about that quota. I also love the fundamentals of sales, which centers around, don't worry about what you have to sell, worry about what somebody needs. And really figure out what's important to them. And then you'll find synergy between what they need and the urgency and what you can offer. So stand behind a product and really put the client first. And so I think the scary part for me was, I feel like I understand the basis of sales and what makes really great salespeople, not those slimy ones that people talk about behind their backs. And I struggled to see how I could do that and meet this quota on a regular basis. And so I think that anxiety or fear behind that quota got to me up front.
And how did you, that's actually, I had this similar discussion with somebody yesterday that was, I think most people would understand the idea of building a relationship, listening, understanding where somebody's coming from. But then doing that on a large scale, it's a different kind of thing, Like I have friends, I have deep, good business partners that, we have these types of relationships with. But how do I do that quickly with many people in order to achieve my sales targets?
It's tough. I mean, if you're not organized, for starters, it's even tougher. So it definitely takes a lot of prioritization and time management. And I just tapped into a lot of really smart people who were successful before, and I tried to emulate and steal everything that they did. It was probably the single reason that I'm still at Gartner. Probably is the single reason why I'm still at Gartner. I've never seen a sales role, a consultative sales role, where if you walk in with no sales experience or you're professionally trained in a sales class, that you just get it and you're successful and you don't need anyone. And in my environment, I think I would have failed for sure if I hadn't tapped into those people. So I stole shamelessly from them in terms of what they did.
So what were some of the big things that you got right out of the gate that helped you succeed?
A couple of the very first lessons were, you have got to figure out where to spend your time, which is funny. It's kind of like, go crush it. Yeah. Good luck with that. How do you figure out where to spend your time if you don't know what you're doing? So some of the words of wisdom around know where to spend or make sure you know that you're spending your time in the best place was okay, how do I define that? What does that really mean? And it comes down to, are you with someone who actually has pain or is willing to talk to you about pain? And how quickly can you get that to that type of a conversation? Are you with someone who actually wants to solve their problem versus somebody who just wants to talk about it? And then are you with somebody who, if they don't have direct access to funds, can get direct access to funds? And so those three things really help me narrow down, okay, I'd love to have those conversations and do discovery, but if I'm struggling to get somebody to open up, I was pretty transparent with it and said, I don't want to waste your time. And as much as I would love to learn more about your company, it sounds like everything's going well and that there aren't really any challenges. And that's great. Here's my name, here's my number. If things change in the future, give me a call. And those people called me, which was funny. I would have probably, without that advice, sat there and tried for days on end to break that egg open.
Yeah. Even that sort of Groundhog Day repetition
Yes.
of, well, call me next month. Well,
Yes.
call me next quarter. Well, call me in 6 months.
You call me.
And that can go on for
Yeah,
indefinitely. I mean,
agreed.
how do you define selling?
How do I define selling? That is a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question. That's why you're trying to create this podcast. I
There you
get
go.
it now.
Yeah.
Well, by very nature of a sale, there is an exchange of something for something else, whether it's bartering or actually some form of currency. And so at some point, there has to be an exchange in the end. But in order to do that, there has to be a desire to make that exchange. The desire to make that exchange is probably the hardest part for people. The exchange itself is getting the funds and getting the power and kind of the things that we teach, if you will, but the desire to get to that exchange takes a lot of art. And so I think you need to find the desire to make the exchange happen.
So would you say selling then is the, sort of provoking that desire, stimulating that desire to make the transaction happen?
Stimulating it, yes, but not trying to force it.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the big differences between what we do is we don't pitch. While everyone can use what we have and help grow their business, if we went around pitching, we're really not uncovering where that true pain is. And so if there's not true pain or you're not willing to divulge that true pain, we may give examples of how we could help, but it usually doesn't work. We usually need to move on to someone that we have pain and challenge with.
Yep. Well, one of the things we have to deal with the sort of introductory sales students is this idea of always be closing, right? They've seen Boiler Room, they've heard the platitudes, but based on what you just said, no, don't always be closing. Because those people that, if that desire isn't there, if they're not serious enough to reveal the issues they're having that you're going to be able to solve, if they're not motivated, if there's no sense of urgency, then
right.
If you're always closing, then you know with almost 100% probability that no, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
Don't close. You already know what they're going to say, right? So
I love that phrase though, and I think it's applicable in context. You should always be closing something. But that doesn't mean this sale.
Maybe not the business, maybe the...
Close it in your pipeline, like closed lost. Close it down in your Outlook where you put it out for another 2 months to send them some form of a tickler. But it doesn't mean that every sales cycle that you're in should close, right? Because that comes down to, do you actually value your time and know where to spend it?
So that's interesting. I like that, actually. Do you think that's what Alec Baldwin meant?
No, I don't.
Do you think he was being that nuanced?
I highly doubt it. I don't even think you wrote that.
It might not be his? No, come on.
He's a Baldwin brother.
I watched him with my own eyes.
Do you think he's going to listen to your podcast? That would be amazing.
I assume he's going to try to emulate my sultry voice. So in your current role, you've got about 200 and some change inside salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your objective with them? What is, if you have a really good year or a really good 5 years, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So my role is very different than most sales leaders. I love my role. It's probably the best job at Gartner. And I love it so much because every single day I get to help people learn how to succeed and be okay with failing and really try to figure out the basics. In my environment, yes, there's a quota. Yes, there is a number. Yes, we need to deliver business. But my focus is around early career development and helping people get the basics, confirming some of the things you've taught or other professors have taught, and really helping expose them in real life situations so that they can get better. And the number will come, right? And so it's a pretty cool environment, and it's probably one of the best jobs in sales, let alone Gartner.
So the things that you emphasize with these early career folks, you mentioned failure. What are the other things that you try to get them comfortable with and get them good at?
There is a huge fear of working with individuals that are much their senior. And how could I possibly know what I need to know to challenge their thinking or to be a quote unquote sales advisor or someone that could help them. So helping them understand that their worth in this sales cycle is not about being an expert about somebody's company, right? You do your pre-call planning, you do your show me, you know me, you're active in the moment, you're present in the conversation, but your worth is really your sheer knowledge of how Gartner can help them and help other organizations by being a great listener and asking questions and getting them to the right resources. So I think they really struggle with that coming right out of school, particularly once they get shut down that first time, and or they get a gruff person who maybe isn't as kind to them as one would hope that they would be. So that's one of them. The other is just the overall maturity. You think about life lessons, and I don't know about you, but I'm a lot more patient now. I don't know if I would call myself patient, but I'm a lot more patient today than I was in my 30s. And definitely more so than I was in my 20s. And patience goes a long way. And it's not something that you can bottle up and drink. And so just helping them understand why people act the way they do and why sales cycles move the way that they do and how business operates. And as much as they're book taught on that, the reality of them not getting a bonus because somebody won't close a deal is right in their face. And just helping them understand those life lessons.
Well, we, meaning the community of university types that teach sales courses to students, have pretty frequently gotten the feedback that, students know exactly what to do in the call. They understand the questioning processes, they understand the, okay, I got an objection, the principles behind some of these face-to-face sort of in the interaction types of scenarios, but they struggle with all of the work they have to put into getting into those actual interactions and all of the hang-ups and no answers and, when things get kind of mundane and they're dragging on and they're going, I can ask these great questions if I could get somebody to answer the phone,
right?
But I can't get anybody to answer the phone. And these sort of the between the interaction things, it seems, is often kind of a criticism of these early career, even graduates from the sales program. They're pretty good at a lot of the things, but it's hard to, you can tell them about it all day long, but you just kind of have to feel it. You have to try it on for size and go, this is what it feels like to seemingly flush 8 hours of my day down the toilet because nobody responded in any way I would have hoped today, and that's part of it too, so they're afraid of rejection. They're maybe inferiority type of complex. They're not sure they're quite qualified or mature enough to stand toe-to-toe with these leaders that they're calling on to try to sell to.
The last thing that I'll add to that is they have been taught to sharp ankle close, and man, do they use it.
Now, what do you mean? Explain that, the sharp angle close.
So when they've done everything you've taught them, right, to your point, they know the questions to ask. They know the boxes they're trying to check. They know the information they're trying to gather. When they come in to ask for what they want, and it doesn't end up the way they wanted, their response oftentimes dictates how the sales cycle will continue. And the response really should be a rejoice, clarify, isolate, address versus threaten. And I've found that when someone has a lot on the line, that silly quota thing we talk about, or that bonus, that the best version of themselves doesn't always come out at that moment, right? And they get very frustrated because, to your point, they put hours in to this and they know that this person should move forward, but the answer's still no. And instead of being frustrated with themselves that they missed something, they snap, maybe say something that now takes the sales cycle into a complete tailspin.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, unless we're live on the call with them, there is nothing
Can't repeat
I can do in that moment. But they need to go through it. I am a firm believer that sales will toughen you up and it will thicken your skin. And I think you've heard me say in classroom settings that whether you decide to continue a profession in sales or not, it's the single best career you could start in, because no matter what you do, you're going to have to sell your ideas, convince people to do things they otherwise didn't want to do, and really have to move an idea from point A to point Z. And sales teaches you how to do that and handle objections all the way throughout. So it's fun. It's hard to watch them because you have to let them fall a little bit in those moments, because they need to have experienced that so that they don't do it again.
So can you give me an example? Like, what would somebody say? They put all this work in, they get the no. Give me an example of what the inappropriate thing that they respond with?
Sure. So, Willy, you had told me that if we don't get this done by the end of the month, that you won't be able to launch your website. And as a result of it, you won't have the material you need. And you're going to miss your deadline, and your CEO is not going to be very happy with you. For starters, depending on how much rapport we actually have, I may now have just escalated your blood pressure, or I may have brought you back down to a place to say, she's right, I probably didn't push hard enough when I asked for this money, or I probably didn't prioritize it in this way. And they feel sometimes that I'm reciting the things we talked about that were important. And then all of a sudden when you say, I know, but we just can't do it now. Call me in a month and let's see if we can do it. Something snaps and they say something like, Willy, aren't you worried about your job? Aren't you worried if this website doesn't go up, what will happen? And at that moment,
little too heavy.
Everything changes. And so it's that balance of being confident in your position, but also having enough empathy with someone and maturity and patience to say, there's a time and a place to say things, and there's a way to say things, and there are things that I might be thinking, but I must frame them in a very, very different way. Otherwise, I've deteriorated the trust and rapport that I just built with this individual versus build it. Yeah.
We hear a lot about, and even in some of my conversations with people over the last couple of days, failure. Well, you need to fail. You need to learn from your failure. It's a great teacher. You mentioned, that's one of the areas that the young career types struggle with. But I can't help but notice that there's also occasions where you just fail, and there's not anything to learn from it.
Sure.
And I've gotten calls from students after they go out and say, hey, man, let me walk you through what happened, and I did this, and man, there was rapport and there was urgency, and I just knew the guy was going to buy, and then he didn't buy. And I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done differently to have turned this around. And certainly most of the time that's a very functional attitude to have, right? That, okay, well, you're gonna try to glean something from this, you're going to try to adapt your behavior next time. But then there's also this little asterisk that goes next to that says, oh yeah, but sometimes they just don't buy,
Yeah.
He's like, well, what if I had done this differently? Well, maybe, and you should ask those questions, but then there's, you're one of the two teams in the Super Bowl,
Right.
One of you is not winning the damn thing.
Right.
Oh, if I had only angled my arm at 5 degrees high, no, like somebody's going to lose, Maybe there were some things you could change, but I wonder, do you ever see people get dysfunctional in that regard, that they're always trying to overanalyze things and saying, look, we want you to be reflective, we want you to be conscientious about the way you're doing this and deliberate, but sometimes you lose an account or it doesn't fly and you just got to move forward,
Agreed. And some of that has to do with the way they're raised and the way that they beat themselves up, so to speak, when when the cards are against them. We hire all different types of people. We follow a methodology called social styles to really understand the type of person that we're working with so that we can communicate really effectively with them. I would argue that person's probably more in the analytical bucket, right, versus a driver bucket. A driver just says, all right, I'm on to the next one. Maybe do a lap around, go shoot some baskets, and I'm done. I've got to get on to the next one. In that instance, one of the techniques that I would leverage is I offer to call the prospect and say, they'll likely give me the truth, particularly if I help them understand it's for learning and development. And I need you to be ready to hear what it is. And it may have something to do with you and it may not. But it's usually that individual who's not a salesperson. It's a mentor, and that's usually the way that I position it is I work closely with this person. I'm a mentor. I'm not asking for your business. Matter of fact, if you asked me to buy today, I wouldn't give you a contract. That's not what I'm calling about. I care immensely about this person, and at some point, either they misunderstood or they misstepped, and it would be invaluable feedback if I could give that to them. And 9 times out of 10, people will call me back, and they will give it. And I will say that it's either, it wasn't as important to the company as I thought it was, and I wasn't able to secure the funds, or I had a big fallout with my boss, and I just can't. They'll give me the political dirt that's going on, or, I'm sure Billy's a nice kid, but he was a little brash, and I felt really uncomfortable trusting that he would act in our best interest, and that's just not the type of salesperson that I want to work with. And I really don't care what the answer is. What I do care is that I get one and I'm able to give it.
Have something to report back.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. And by the way, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and to rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.